The world needs effective communication. I'm Tina B, founder and chief communicator of Tina B, LLC, a public speaking and storytelling coaching company. And I protect audiences from boring speeches. I'm super excited to be here today with all of you, and especially excited to co-facilitate with this amazing leadership strategist, Amber Howard. She is from Toronto, Canada. And I'm lucky enough to say that we have a cool story of how we met. It was through a friend of a friend through LinkedIn. And so social media has this beautiful power of, if you're open to it, that you have conversations, connections. And, we met clear back, I believe in 2020, like in the late fall. And I put a plug in and said, hey, are you open to doing a webinar with me? As we got to talking, she said, absolutely. She yes-anded me. So today we're going to focus on dancing with conversations, let listening lead. I'm going to let Amber talk about and introduce herself, and then we'll just kick off our conversation today.
It's so great to be here with you, and I'm excited. So this is may not be what you traditionally think with slides and all of that stuff. Tina and I are literally just going to be dancing in conversation with you around some key points about leadership and communication. So my name is Amber Howard. I'm originally from New Zealand, but I've lived in Canada for most of my life, which is why I don't have what some people consider to be the world's greatest accent. I am a consultant, a coach, an instructor. I teach for some of the leading universities here in Canada in business analysis, project management, change management. And really, though, what everything I do boils down to helping people get unstuck and moving from wherever they are today to where they want to get to in the future, and helping them understand what are the gaps and what are the solutions that we need to build those gaps. And why I love this conversation, I'm so interested in this conversation, is communication is just kind of foundational to all of that. You can't do any of the things that I do without communication. So I'm also a mom. I've got 3 kids. I'd like to share that just for relatedness. They're 25, 24, and 15. And yeah, that's a little bit about me.
I love it. Well, and I live on a farm in Southwest Iowa. So I have a little 11-year-old who's 11 going on 45 in terms of his soul. He loves all things golf. We have goats, free range ducks, free range chickens, cows. It's a true functioning farm. It's over 150 years old. And I'm passionate, like Amber, to help leaders communicate more effectively, whether they have that goal to up level and do a keynote someday or TEDx talk, or just being able to network more effectively and share that strong story and communicate who they are and what's their why in a very meaningful way. So I'm excited that we can have this conversation. And we're going to kick it off with the foundation, I believe, when we think of listening, is human beingness. So I'd love, Amber, for you to talk about human beingness, what exactly that means to you, and share maybe some insights about human beingness.
Yeah, it's really great, right? So, I mean, we're all human beings, and if you think about it, we spend the majority of our time talking about what we do and what we have. There's very little training or discussions or communication around what is it to be. And I was blessed back in 2016 to get exposed to a really great curriculum through a company called Landmark, which is all inside of phenomenology and ontology, so language and being. But why this is so important to a conversation about communication is we're always being something. We can't help it. It's just part of what it is to be a human being. And there's a direct relationship, not only to the actions we take in who we're being, right? So think about it. If you're being courageous or being cowardly, you're going to take 2 separate types of actions, right? So there's a direct correlation between who we're being in any moment and the actions we take. But there's also a relationship between who we're being and what other people experience. And so I just want to invite you to think about, for example, maybe there's a time in your life where someone's been communicating something to you and it just felt off for you. Like there was just something, and it wasn't in anything that they were saying. I want you to consider that there was something about the way that person was being that they may not even have been aware of when they gave that communication that left you with that experience. An example I like to give is, imagine if I told you that I loved you, but who I was being in that moment was hateful. Do you think you would have the experience of being loved? Right? So this is why examining, and oftentimes it's interesting, who we're being is hidden from our view. It's not something we bring a lot of conscious awareness to. So this is why we're starting here. We're going to build on this concept as we go through the rest of the conversation this afternoon with you all, but I just wanted to start with that. And I would love to hear maybe from a couple of you or anyone who'd like, what's present for you when in that conversation? What does that bring up for you when you think about beingness or the impact of who you're being on other people? Would anyone like to? Hey, Katie.
I was just going to share when you said somebody says something that feels out of context or makes you question maybe something that you said or did. So yesterday I gave a mini presentation on a nonprofit organization I'm involved with. And when I was done, the lady asked me, "How did you think you did?" And I was like, she's asking me that because she thinks I didn't do a good job. That's what my head immediately went to. Because I'm like, well, she didn't say, "Oh, you did a good job." She said, "How did you think you did?" So, but that doesn't necessarily mean that, but that was the way she said it made me feel.
And that kind of links to this idea of paralanguage, or the tone is a function of being. So paralanguage is the sound of the words versus the actual content of the message. So if I were to look at Amber and say, "Nice hair," did I really mean nice hair? The content of the message meant nice hair, but the actual paralanguage in terms of the tone of my voice, as well as my nonverbal communication, the rolling of my eyes, that presence, that choice of where I decided to be, and that person that I decided to be, that beingness, there was a gap. There's a gap in terms of the content of the message and the actual nonverbal communication. So it's trying to match our head space and our heart space together so that we can co-create communication. Because I think too many times we are quick to communicate without really realizing who are we and how are we choosing to show up to connect to the other person. And how is that going to make them feel? Because you're right, Katie, that your example, she may not have meant that, but the way it came off, her tone of voice, her whole body language made you feel that way. And obviously, if she didn't mean that, she'd probably feel bad to know that she meant that, but it's being aware, it's self-awareness of how we show up and communicate in the given space with a given person and the context. Any other thoughts or examples?
Well, I just wanted to add on to what you were saying, Tina, like who we're being, that's what's giving that, right? To like that tone of voice. I used to have a coach who used to be like, "You don't own your face." And like, she would mean it in two ways. Like and I think Amina's laughing because she knows exactly who I'm talking about. But my coach Audrey would always be like, "You don't own your face." And it was like, one, you're not responsible for your face. Like I'm not being responsible for what my face is expressing out in the world. And two, this idea that I actually don't own my face, that my face and the expressions on it are like the impact that has on other people that they own, because we're always dancing in conversation with someone, right? So the more we can bring, as Tina said, that awareness to who we're being, that gives us a real access to actually having the impact out here with other people that we want to have. So
right. And it's a whole balance of emotional intelligence, conversational intelligence, connecting those together to have communication and cognitive intelligence, so that we are truly, getting the message out there, because messages are ongoing. They're sending and receiving constantly. So we want it to be the message and the intention. We want to be intentional, and we want our intentional message to reach to that audience. So it leads to this idea of active listening. What is it? How do we do it? It's been labeled a soft skill. Now we know that the word soft bothers me. When we think about communication, as far as oral communication or public speaking has been labeled a soft skill, same with listening skills. And ironically, everything I've read in the world of communication, managers, what are they wanting? Great listeners. They don't want to repeat what they're saying over and over again. They want the job done effectively and efficiently, they also want effective communicators. And I actually researched this concept of soft skill, and it came in the 1950s, where the military, they were starting to grow and evolve, and they had labeled industrial work as hard skills, things that were tangible, easy to measure, and easy to train and do. So anything with a machine was, this is what we want done from point A to point B. And so they realized in the 50s, however, in order to be an effective leader, there's more to the work than those hard skills. So then they just labeled leadership, communication, public speaking, listening, those abstract concepts as soft skills, because they're the opposite. Not because they're soft, as in our connotation of soft, but because they're really hard to be trained and done effectively, as well as hard to measure. So I thought that was interesting. So let's talk a little bit about this idea of active listening. What are your thoughts on that, Amber?
Well, it's interesting. I'm a philosopher at heart, right? So it's always about defining your terms. And I think for me, active listening it's like about being present with someone, right? I'm listening in such a way that it's not about me getting my point across or me communicating. I'm listening to really understand what the other person is trying to communicate. And one of the things that I've discovered through my own training and experiences is that oftentimes, like, we have reoccurring dialogues with people in our life. So, look to some of the really important relationships, coworkers, partners, children. Are there conversations that keep coming up again and again? And you just feel like you have this experience that, like, we keep having this conversation over and over again and it doesn't ever resolve itself. I used to have these a lot with my kids around homework. I used to have it a lot with my kids around cleaning their room. Like we just, your partners, maybe it's taking the garbage out or like whatever it is, but so consider that if you have a reoccurring dialogue, it's because somewhere in the conversation, someone's not getting gotten. That the communication is not getting fully gotten by one or by both parties in the communication. And I was really blessed to learn a technique for communication I call it recreation. And I learned it in a leadership training program that I did in 2017. And it's this idea that when you recreate someone else's communication, you get not only their, like what they said, nothing added, taken away, you're not adding your spin to it or your thoughts, but you're getting their communication, but you're also getting their commitment and their experience. When you can do that with someone in communication, it literally disappears upset. And I love to share an example. So my youngest son, his name is Keegan, he's 15 years old. His father and I broke up when Keegan was 2.5. And for the first 8 years after we split up, whenever Keegan would go back and forth on vacation, for the weekends, because he lived with me for most of that time, there would be a lot of angst and anxiety, right? And when he was at daddy's, he would complain about wanting to be with me. When he was with me, he would want to be with daddy. And what I would say to him, so we had this reoccurring dialogue about his visits. And what I would say to him is, buddy, can't you just be positive, be grateful when you're at daddy's? And I would always say, well, try and find more time. But so after I did this course in 2016, Keegan and I were cuddling on the couch. It was right after Christmas, the year after I did the course. And we were waiting he'd had Christmas with me and he was waiting for his dad to come pick him up for his time with him for the holidays. And this conversation started again. And I finally got what Keegan was trying to communicate, that I don't even think he knew what he was trying to say. And I said to him, I'm really sorry, it must suck for you that you don't get to spend time with your parents together. It really, I bet you wish more than anything that you could have holidays with mommy and daddy together again. And I'm telling you, that conversation stopped and we've never had it again. Because on some level, I got Keegan's communication and he was gotten in the communication. So I know I just said a lot. Tina, I'd love to, I know we talked about this before, but I'd love to, your thoughts on what I just said or anyone else. Go ahead, Amina.
Yeah, so Amber, thank you so much for just sharing the recreation technique. And like Amber, I have completed a same training program also back in 2017, 2018. So what came present for me is that which is not spoken, what's not being said. So in one of those leadership training programs, what I learned is listen for and reliably deliver that which matters. So it's like listening for that to that person, like what is really not being said? What are they afraid? What are they feeling? Basically what you just what you said, Amber, about recreation. And it's like, that's when I felt like most effective in communication, when I actually heard the person, when I heard their concerns, even when they haven't explicitly told me those. So I have current recurring dialogue with a friend of mine, and I really dislike when I am, when I'm like, let's say dropped, I wouldn't say dropped. Okay, so when we make commitments to see each other and they're changed last minute, and then that change is not communicated. So I immediately go in my head in a blame, like, well, like, isn't that a part of you that you should communicate to me, going in a blame game? But what I really failed to communicate is I really understand that your daughter needs you. Your daughter is dealing with a lot of stuff, transitioning into her teaching career. And I really get it that valuable time with your daughter is very, very important to you. So absolutely no concerns. Sure, we can reschedule our outing or our meeting at a later date. But because I failed to communicate that, I've immediately felt the impacts of self-blame or blaming of the other. So I would say that I did not effectively use the recreation technique that you just shared, Amber. Thank you.
Well, and I think it's something that we highlight with this idea of active listening. I love that you brought that up, Amina, that we have moments, we're human, that we miss the mark. But when we can always reconnect with that person and have that conversation and move the conversation and the connection and the relationship forward. I've been trained formally in improvisation, and at the core, in order to be effective, if you think of the word improv or improvisation, I'm sure how many of you think of Whose Line Is It Anyway, or Second City, or Tina Fey, or Amy Poehler, those amazing improvisers, they at the core are actively listening, because they are tuned in not only to the dialogue which their partner is saying to make them look good, but they're also tuning into what they're not saying, the nonverbal cues, and how they're creating a character. Now, obviously, in the world of life, we're kind of on, we're on all the time as far as having impromptu conversations that you don't know what you're going to get from the other person. And that foundational rule of active listening, of being intentional, of being fully present and listening to understand, is really crucial and important. I think of, whether it's with my child and understanding, at the end of the day, when I'm exhausted and when you're more tired, it's really harder to listen. But when he's wanting to play golf and he has an expectation in mind, and he wants to putt all over the yard. And this happened just last night. And I didn't understand that he was expecting an actual game and that he wanted 9 holes. I was just thinking, oh, we're going to hit some balls around. And when I finally paused and said, oh, buddy, you wanted a formal game to practice for your tournament on Friday. That's what you wanted. You didn't just want to hit some balls. He said no. And that really connected us in a better way when I understood and I took a step back in trying to say, what was he wanting in this given communication? And so I was able to dance with him, so to speak.
I love that, Tina. And when you and Amina were talking, one of the things that I got for myself, and one, I just want to thank you, Amina, because I just realized that there's a friend I need to go clean up with around the same thing, right? Like I just had not been getting in his world. And so now I'm like, and this is so great, right? Because the things that we know, it's about using the tools. Just because we have the knowledge doesn't mean we're always using the tools. And I find that one of the things that gets in the way of active listening the most is in any conversation, there's more than just 2 people talking to one another. In fact, even on this Zoom call right now, there's like the conversation I'm having with you, the conversation Tina's having with you, there's a conversation you're having with us, and then there's all of our conversations that we're having with ourselves in our own minds, right? So it gets really loud. And so what gets in the way of active listening is and just raise your hand if you've had this experience ever where you're in your head trying to figure out what to say. Yeah, so try on. And I invite you to actually go out and practice this, that when you're being fully present with someone, you always know what to say. Now, sometimes when you're being that vulnerable, because it is actually vulnerable to be that present with people, sometimes when you're being that present, you might have a thought, can I really express that? Is it safe? Is it okay? And then you have a choice to make about whether you feel safe enough or comfortable enough to express it. But I promise you, and I've practiced, you can do this everywhere in your life, that you will always know what to say as long as you're fully being present. There will never be anything to figure out.
I love that. It's beautiful. And it makes me think of this idea of when I actually took salsa dance lessons and all things dancing in 2003. And I love to dance. And I went into it with expectations of, I want to turn when I want to turn. I want to move this way, do all these things. But in this moment, the teacher was really good and very graceful and generous with me. She said, Tina, you're going to have to feel the following. And that was a powerful moment because I'm so used to being the leader, wanting to do the moves, like turn me now. And she blindfolded me. And I all of a sudden went from, it was like this big breakthrough, right? Where I was tuning into the body language of my partner rather than trying to push myself into the experience. And I got a lot more dance partners that way as well. And it was a lot more fun. And it was like this beautiful co-creation because I felt the following and I allowed the conversation to unravel. Like with Amber, we've had multiple conversations and the time just goes like that because it's very meditative. It's like I get into this beautiful dance with her, and it's because I've chosen to not look on my phone and be distracted, to get out of my head about it. That's another thing, being top of the mind. That's another improv rule. Just be top of the mind, out of your head, and moment by moment, just yes anding, yes, the person, and accept who they are and add something to the conversation once they're done talking, not getting in that intrapersonal communication where it's easy to do and think of those thoughts of, because that's one thing that was also insight when I have a wonderful partner. And he said, Tina, I love your enthusiasm for communication. It's beautiful. However, sometimes you interrupt. And it was the bubbling of the enthusiasm, like, ooh, trigger, idea. I want to talk. I want to say that idea. Trigger, trigger, trigger. But what he taught me in that moment years ago was that enthusiasm is beautiful, but simmer down and allow the other to be present and let them speak. And that's enthusiastic too. That's being enthusiastic for them and modifying your external need to look good or to sound smart or to be the funniest. Because I think that's a lot of times of what happens, especially in networking situations where we can ooze too much, like, oh, I want to get that new client, or oh, I want to present myself in this really cool way and be memorable. But in that effort, we're coming on like a strong cologne. And everybody knows that person that's walked by with way too much perfume or cologne. You're like, too much. And you don't want to be too much.
I love it, Tina. I would have the other thing, right? Like I would be having a dialogue with myself in my head. And then like I would say something because I'd moved ahead in the conversation like 5 places. And people would look at me like, what are you talking about? Like, how did you just get from point A to point like Z without saying anything out loud? Because my mind is like constantly going, right? And so, and yeah, we do. I mean, it's natural that we want to share ourselves and our ideas, but you know, when you can get to that place, I love our conversations. Like anytime Tina and I talk, I look forward to those conversations. I'm like, I can't wait to speak with her because I just know that it's going to be this incredible experience of just being with one another, and whatever comes up in the conversation comes up in the conversation. And it's this like give and take, and she'll lead parts of the conversation and it's that back and forth. And it's just, it really is a delightful experience.
I love that. And I would totally agree and echo everything you said, Amber. And Zarefsky actually says that thinking is easier and faster to do than listening. And so active listening is a choice. And so what you do, Amber, and I'm guilty of that as well, is I hear a word or an idea, and then that triggers like, oh, this research, or oh, this idea, or oh, this story. And our brains can do this. And we get into that mode of thinking, because it's super fast to do. But we have to make that intentional decision to choose to listen, so that the other, that we are taking in what they're giving us, and that it's about them and not about ourselves.
It's beautiful.
So we're looking into the next beat of what we're going to talk
Amina
about.
just had her hand up, Tina, so
Oh, I'm sorry. I missed your hand up, dear. Go ahead, Amina.
Are you talking to me? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes,
I noticed
yes.
you put your
Great.
hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to just quickly sum up what Tina, what you shared, and I can so relate to salsa dancing. Salsa dancer myself, and it's so great. I tend to also lead, so I just really love this that you said, let's be led in a dance and have a co-creation, and don't try to figure out the next step. That's exactly what I'm doing when I'm salsa dancing. Oh my God, if he goes there, I'm going to go there. So I'm already in advance leading to that side, and my teacher saying, I'm not even going there. So I really get it, because this analogy is so similar to figuring out next step in my head. What am I going to say when they say this? They have the story, I heard him, I'm like, but let me give them advice. So when you talk about active listening, and when Amber shared the recreation tool, would you also couple that? I don't know if this segues into your next section, but maybe you can answer this later. Would you then asking questions to elicit clarity, to have the other person feel gotten?
I would say yes. I think that shows that you have that care and concern for making sure that you're getting what they're saying. And so I use that now. If you overuse that tool, then they're wondering, are you even listening to begin with? So it's really important to use it appropriately. But I do think it helps people get gotten if you sum up what they've just said and say, so is this what you mean? Or can you clarify when you said this, or what exactly did you mean when you were talking about this? Then that's showing that, okay, you're giving back that step in the dance to them and allowing them to share their insight.
Great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
100% agree with everything that you just said, Tina. I think it's important to ask clarifying. It's a great, one of my mentors says, the quality of your life is given by the quality of the questions that you ask. Right. So, for other people to know that you're really because it shows that you're engaged with what it is that they're saying. Yeah. Before we move on to talk about the next topic we wanted to cover, was there anyone else who had any questions or anything, what's coming up in this conversation? Are you like, yeah, I agree? Or are you like, no? Any other thoughts? You never have to share. We just always want to give an opportunity if anyone wants to.
I love the smiling faces. That nonverbal cue tells me that, hey, I think they're with us and they like this. So the next topic that we want to highlight is this idea of network of conversations. What we are as human beings is a network of conversations. They're all the time, ongoing. You cannot not communicate in terms of what you say, how you say it. Nonverbal communication is important. You want to make sure, your face is about 80+%, about 80-ish% of your communication. So that's where the challenge of the pandemic with, the masks, you're getting eyes, and eyes and forehead can tell a lot, but making sure that we align our conversations, whether it's with social groups or professional network and beyond, and families and friends, whatever that looks like. So Amber, talk to me a little bit about network of conversations.
Yeah, well, I think it's this idea that we're always engaged and we're in different networks of conversations all the time. We're in conversations with ourselves. Again, to go back to what you were saying earlier, Katie, your coworkers said whatever they said, and then there was this whole network of conversations that arose inside you and your own mind in response to what she said, right? She just said what she said. And typically, often when people make comments to us, they're not even responding to us. It has nothing to do with us. People are just, from my studies in neurolinguistic programming and different mindset trainings, we're in our subconscious mind 94 to 96% of the time. Our brains are not interested in doing a lot of thinking because it takes a lot of energy. So we're constantly running patterns in our brain. And so what she said was probably an automated response. How your mind reacted to what she said, right? So it's not a problem that we're part of all of these networks of conversations. What's interesting to note about it is how infrequently we ever say anything new. And just look at the current state of the world that we live in today, right? I mean, just the topic of relationships between women and men and how the network of conversations, we could spend hours. And I know it's all women on this call right now, but add a couple of men to this, we could literally spend days talking about the relationship between men and women, masculinity, femininity, men's roles, gender roles, all of this stuff. But how much of what is being said is actually saying anything new? It's typically just regurgitating things that we've been saying. Maybe it's got a little bit of a different spin. So it's an interesting, I find it it's an interesting access to be able to say, well, what could I say newly about this? And one of our invitations for you coming out of today, and you can be kind of like engaging with it if through the rest of the conversation is, what can I say newly after this conversation about leadership? What can I say newly about communication? What can I say newly? What could I say newly about myself? Because you've been in a network of conversations with yourself about you for your whole life.
Absolutely. And I think that's a beautiful point, particularly, Amber, when I'm thinking about the pandemic. I read something that during that time, we become more so. Whatever, if you're kind, more so in terms of more kind, or if you're angry, maybe that comes out and you're more so. What I found for me during that time period is the conversations I was having in my head. I mean, I get my energy and fueled by people. And had you told me over a year ago that this was going to happen, where I'd connect with somebody from a different country and we'd facilitate a webinar, I mean, I am the pigpen of technology. The weirdest things happen to me. And my husband is my IT guy for my company. And so I had to have new network of conversations with myself, because when I was having those hard ones, or not feeling good, or being down, anxious, depressed about the technology, about not being able to see people, guess how people felt when I was connecting with them is that I actually had a quad meets. This was a networking group through LinkedIn that was going on from like May until May of 2020 through about end of December, early January of this past year. And one of my early quad meets, it was probably early October, and I was in this weird purgatory space where I had just decided to leave my job at as a chief creative officer, and I communicated that with the employer. They were good with it, they were supportive of it. But guess what? I was still in this weird space of how am I going to convey and communicate that? And so I literally was on this networking call, meeting 3 new people. And a gentleman looked at me and he says, well, if you're a storyteller, you need to get your story straight and I could coach you. And he was really just on me. But what he revealed in that moment was how insecure and the weird conversations were coming out because of what I was saying inside. And that was the hardest thing to hear in front of 2 other people I didn't know, but it was actually a gift, because he was teaching me that those network of conversations internally can affect your network of conversations externally with other people.
So great. And just to elaborate on that a little bit more. So like from a brain science point of view, from, neurolinguistics, and before the age of 7, we don't have a conscious mind. So the part of our mind that assesses, judges, compares, like children before the age of 7. So this network of conversations that you still engage with, or most of us do, started in childhood. These are the conversations, we call them in other programs that have done young conversations. So, for me, an example, I have a very young conversation about being a bad girl, about not wanting to be a bad girl, right? And that there's this whole network of conversations that comes off of that. It started when I was like 4. I don't even remember why it started, but it's like, I need to be appropriate, or this concern about being inappropriate, gotta be. And it's funny because the network of conversation goes just as much to wanting to be a good person and being liked as it does to being rebellious and not being told what to do, right? So why I say that is it's just interesting to note that none of these conversations, like they all got created before you were even aware of it, at a time in your life where there are things happening around you and you didn't have the ability in your own mind to accept or reject the views of your parents, the environments that you were in. Things just happen. It's also kind of fun to note that's why kids can have imaginary friends, and they're as real for them as like my friendship with Tina is for me, because to a child under the age of 7, they can't distinguish between a flesh and blood friend and an imaginary friend.
Well, and I think when we had talked in a previous conversation, Amber, I love an easy question to be asking when we think of conversations with other people is it appropriate? Am I being appropriate? And I think that those are questions to ask when with whatever individual or individuals we're having conversations with, whether it's facilitating a workshop or networking or one-on-one coaching or just connecting professionally or interpersonally. It's asking, is it appropriate or am I being appropriate? And how I choose to show up and connect with other people.
I really like that. My daughter and I, she's 24, she's like my best friend. And we used to have this relationship where we would say anything we wanted to each other. We called it being fully expressed. And what it really looked like in reality was like verbal barbs and sarcastic comments being thrown back and forth all the time, right? So we'd be talking, she'd say something that she would know would push my button, and then I would respond. And so we actually made an agreement with one another back in, I think it was in 2018, where we said, we're going to be self-expressed, not fully expressed. And that distinction for me, what is the difference between being fully expressed and self-expressed? When I'm fully expressed, I'll say whatever I want to whomever I want, and I'm not being responsible for the impact of my communication on others. When I'm being self-expressed, to Tina's point, I call it speaking into the listening. Like I'm being responsible for what I'm communicating and how my communication is going to leave someone else. And it actually has made a huge, we still have playfulness in our communication, but we've stopped the verbal warfare, because it was literally verbal warfare that was happening in our communication.
Well, and are there any thoughts about that before we kind of dive into communication style? Because I think that that's a big part of listening effectively. Any thoughts or questions or comments? Well, go ahead, Amina.
So I just to sum up what Amber said, I just really feel like it's so great, like how I choose to show up and communicate, and how my communication will have impact on others. And I often am just fully self-expressed and I will say what's on your mind. And my closest friends and family who are dear to me, they just know who I am. And sometimes I'm just so blunt, right? And that's appreciated in certain circumstances where friends and family need an evaluation. How does this look like on me? Or like, can you give me evaluation of my CV or something like that? But I'm often like that, being authentic with myself, but not really thinking, how will my communication have an impact if I say something so blunt and forward? Will that lead them, like less valued, or is that maybe too much for them to take on at this time, right? So like for me, that's the biggest takeaway from this conversation. It's like, wow, like this is where I can pay more attention. It's just not about being myself and being authentic and saying what I think is right for me or for that person, but it's like, how will speaking with an intention, what will be the impact on that person? Absolutely. And I think that's often missed. We just speak to be spoken, and we just don't really put ourselves in other person's shoes. How would they receive our communication?
Yes, I love that. And I love how when we think about the other, then it will affect and influence the future conversations, because there's a social layer and a content layer for every communication that we engage in. The social layer is that relationship that you have with that person. The content layer is the message. So that moment in time affects and influences socially the connection and relationship that you have with that person, and it affects and influences then the content of future messages as well. This leads us to thinking about communication style, and Hamilton lays out 4 primary communication styles, and we tend to lean into one more than the other others, but the context does matter. So the 4 different styles are blind, hidden, closed, and open. And blind is really focused in on being that person who's really good at giving lots of information about themselves. They share how they're the expert in their field. They love to talk about themselves, high levels of self-disclosure, but then they are not as good at accepting feedback. They're blind to their own issues and ways in which to grow. That's the blind form or style. The hidden form is the opposite of the blind, where they're really great at sharing feedback and a really amazing listener, but they don't share much about themselves. Their self-disclosure is less. They tend to hide a little bit more. The closed communicator is much more focused and comfortable with communicating with things, working on processes or systems rather than with people. And the open is obviously the opposite of closed, that they are very open with their self-disclosure, a talk of self, as well as giving and receiving feedback. Now, you tend to, from a personality standpoint, probably lean into one of those more than the other, but context does matter. It affects and influences how we think about ourselves. So for example, I'm primarily an open communicator. I love to connect with people. I wear my emotions somewhat within some reservation on my sleeve, but I love listening to people, sharing about myself, but also take in what they're saying too and accept their feedback to help myself grow. Now, if I'm getting, for example, my new position when I was a professor at Creighton University, and I was the newbie in the Department of Comm Studies, I wanted to be that person that was seen in high respect and knew my stuff. So I was less open. I became a little bit more hidden, where I would be a lot of listening, ask the questions, be very engaged and curious, which I think is a place for that. But then as I got more comfortable, I became a lot more open with my department chair and fellow colleagues and workers. But so I'm just giving that as an example, as that there are moments that we morph into a different style based on our comfort level, based on the context, based on the situation overall.
I think safety plays a big part of that, right? I mean, I agree. This is definitely your field of expertise, Tina, about these styles, but I definitely know from my own experience, right, that like the environment that I create and that's around me, whenever I facilitate a workshop or instruct a course, I'm like, it's Vegas for the next however long, right? Because you want people to feel safe to be able to communicate. And that's like, it comes from me, right? It comes from like who I'm being that creates that safe space for people to show up and to communicate whatever is there for them. So I love that idea that like you could choose to, not like it's a truth, but be 100% responsible for everything, like for how people communicate with you, for what you say to them, and not like it's blame or fault, but as an access to being able to really have the kinds of relationships and communication that you want in life.
Well, in addition to vacillating into different styles, I think we've talked about this, that we tend to connect with people that are very similar to who we are as communicators, how we think. And I love how you talked about that idea of building a bridge from our map of how we view the world and how we see ourselves and how we communicate with other people's maps and how they view the world and see themselves and communicate.
I love that. I love that idea. So this idea of the map of the world comes from neuro-linguistic programming, right? And so it's the idea that each of us has a map of the world inside of our own minds. So no two human beings, even people who are close and share a lot of the same values or norms, have the exact same map. And so you may recall an experience where someone else's behavior has occurred as absurd to you. Like you've looked at other people's behavior and you've been like, I have no idea. I cannot understand how that person would say that or do that. And their behavior is given by the way they view the world, their perception of reality. And so I love, this idea, what Tina was pointing to, is that if you want to actually lead other people and affect change with others, you can't start from your map of the world. You have to you have to do your best. You'll never fully understand their map of the world. But in order to really be able to affect change and lead other people, you want to be engaged in conversations that help you get onto their map so you can build a bridge back to yours to make the difference with them. And I just think that's so powerful.
Right, and Pam brought up a question about this, about how exactly do you then create safe spaces? And I think that's a really important question to ask. And I'll start, and then Amber, if you chime in, that'd be great. I think the first thing is being self-aware of where are you in your headspace and heart space. So if you're having a stressful day, if you're overtired, if you're hungry, all those things really do matter in terms of how you show up as a communicator. And if you're any of those things, you're going to have a harder time communicating in, you know, those crucial conversations that are challenging or hard or difficult. You have to be at the top of your game, which means appropriate rest, appropriate fed, you know, just those physiological needs. But also your heart space has to be in a yes and attitude, where I'm going to be positive about the situation, the person, and then showing up and accepting the moment for what it is. And it's important when you can go into a space. I think if you have to have that difficult conversation and it's you're the supervisor and you're in that hierarchy, first of all, that's upward communication. So that sets the stage, and that can be challenging for that individual. And if they know that they're getting corrective feedback, that can also be challenging. What I would suggest doing is, first of all, you know, setting the stage where it's a comfortable space where you don't have barriers, maybe even having instead of you sitting at the desk and them sitting like that. To me, that kind of conveys and communicates that I'm in charge, I am the supervisor. That's a nonverbal cue. So maybe you get a conference space where you're just sitting at a table and you're sitting across from each other. So you're setting it as, we are of equal ground. We are going to have this conversation. And then I think the other thing is setting it by asking them, how are they doing? How are they feeling? What are their thoughts or perceptions, so that they can give insights. You might glean from that some help to move the conversation forward, that maybe there was something that they share that you don't know existed in their life, a personal thing or a hard relationship at workplace that you didn't know existed. So being aware of where they are in their head and heart space and asking them to share. And then from there, when you're giving, and I'm just giving an example of corrective feedback, that you want to be specific to the behavior, do the I messages, I noticed, or I have seen, or the concrete behaviors of, I noticed you check your phone frequently at meetings, or I noticed or observed that you're coming late to meetings. You know, whatever those behaviors are, that you communicate what you see. And the really essential important fact is that you highlight that you want them to be successful, that that I need you on my team, and that I want you to be a part of that team. And that's essential that we lead and as a team together, that the team needs you, I need you, and I want you to be successful. And when you convey that in your message making, then I think then you've set the nonverbal stage of a comfortable space. That's the nonverbals, that you come in and you don't come in with your sell, tell, yell attitude, that you come in with, we're going to co-create this communication together. I am choosing to listen to you and understand you. And that listening for understanding shines through. And when you are able to share the want and desire for them to be not only inclusive within that team, but the intentionality of being that you want their success, I think that they will truly, the conversation will be a lot safer and a lot more connected.
Yeah, I would echo everything you said, Tina, and then I would just add, like, you know, if you're able, depending on the nature of the relationship, to know and understand who the other person is, how they like to be communicated to. So, you know, a little bit of a different assessment, but like DISC, which is based on Myers-Briggs. So there are some people who are more task-oriented, and there are other people who are more people-oriented. So typically task-oriented people, like who are really task-oriented, they don't want, like, I love the lovey-feely conversations and social dialogue, and, you know, I want all of that. But there are other people who are very task-oriented who, you know, for them, they don't want all of that detail, or they don't want, you know, they just want to get to the point. They want, you know, so if you have the ability to get to know the person well enough to kind of know how they prefer to be communicated to, that can be really helpful. And also understanding, like in that model disc, people who are influential, so there's like dominant, influential, steadfast, and conscientious. And dominant and conscientious are more task-oriented, and influential and steadfast are more people-oriented. I'm an I, and
Me too.
not surprising. That does not surprise me at all. But people who are I's, like, we don't deal well with criticism. Like, it's like we have like now, I know Tina and I have both done a lot of work. I've actually gotten to the point where I embrace it and I like it, but there's parts of my identity. If I'm not being a very aware person, feedback really, you could tell me 15 things that I did great. And then there's one comment, and like, that's all my mind will focus on, right? So it's part of that is like you taking responsibility, especially if you're a leader, if you're managing people or in your family. Getting to know the people that you're communicating with, I think, is really important. And then the only other thing I'll say is who you're being. Back to this conversation of beingness. Like, as a coach, and I've coached Amina at times, so she can attest to this. I said some really strong things to the people I coach, but who I was being in that moment, like, because I'm out to be an interruption, but who I was being in that moment was a stand for something, or I was being a contribution. And or I was being loving, because to me, being a stand is loving, right? So it's creating a safe space is also, I think, about being aware of and responsible for who you're being in that moment. Yeah. And it's back to what Tina said at the beginning. It's hard to do that when you're hungry or tired or all of those other things, right? It's really difficult to be responsible when we're not our physical best or emotional or mental best.
Right. And that leads us to, I mean, we're in our last few minutes here. I definitely want to have time for your questions, comments, thoughts. But what kind of leader do you want to be? And I think it's important to note that the world needs effective communication. Your audience can choose to tune you out or choose to listen, but you're in charge of you. And in order to be that leader, you need to think, how do I choose to show up, be emotionally intelligent and aware, have that conversational intelligence of choosing to share and co-create with the other rather than sell, tell, yell. And then you have that communication intelligence. What questions do you have for Amber and me as we're wrapping up here? Both of us are open to discovery calls. I do 3-month, 6-month, 12-month signature coaching programs to help up-level how you communicate with groups and your elevator speech, a keynote, TEDx, whatever you are interested in that world. And I know that Amber, you have also a coaching program as well. And I do engaging workshops that highlight storytelling and communication skills too.
Yeah, really good. Yeah, I would love to get on a call and talk about, if anyone's interested, what your goals are, what you're out to create, what you're, and if there's any way that I could be of support to you. So we definitely can share some links in the email after with links to book a call. But yeah, does anyone have any questions? What are you taking away from today?
Yeah, well,
and
I love that question. What can you newly say that, what can you say newly about what you learned at the end of this workshop?
And I notice a couple of you are in your offices, so perhaps you might not be able to, because of the
You can type it.
Sure. You could always type it in the chat for sure if you can't say it out loud. But we would like to share.
Yeah, I'll share. So what I learned new is from the question, how do you create safe space? I definitely noticed that if I had a long week of work or busy schedule, or if I'm hungry, that I'm more agitated and edgy. So I don't have compassion. I don't have tuned listening skill and that heart space to really be available to that person. I am more reserved and I'm just more thinking of my immediate needs, or even unconsciously thinking, having the need to get off the call to eat or to rest or whatever that is. So for me, this is a brand new information that I'm like, yeah, I've really noticed my pattern when I am really good, positive, and all my basic needs are taken care of. I'm more available to the other. And when any of those needs are, as we would say, out of integrity, they're not working. If I'm hungry, not slept, I am short fused, so it doesn't serve me.
That's great.
Thank you, Amina. That's so good.
Yeah, thank
Like
you.
you guys gave us some kind of fun words to think about. So I will never think about my technology issues different than Pigpen of technology. Thank you, Tina.
Pam, we are on the same level. I connected.
I
I'm
resemble
so grateful
that.
Zoom worked.
But fully express. I mean, so you are exactly right. These aren't, there isn't much new, but I did listen differently and have some different ways to describe this that maybe I hadn't before.
So great. Thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that, Pam.
Yeah, thank you. Any other last thoughts or questions?
Tina and Amber, I do have a question. Do either of you focus on sort of communication? How does one present themselves? I know, Tina, you mentioned the elevator speech. So, for example, I am now transitioning in a slightly different career than what I'm currently doing. I'm currently an owner of a small business, cleaning business company, an entrepreneur. And I want to transition back into my passions of teaching, communication, conflict resolution skills, international development, sustainable development. So my question is, and it's also connecting with one of the other girlfriends, and she's in a same situation where she is repeating same patterns. So what I'm seeing in her is like, you don't really communicate effectively of who you are or what you want. So do either one of you focus on the summary, like the bio, the summary, or evaluating some of the different written material, let's say applications for grad school, or where you need to write your bio, or LinkedIn bio summary, or even resumes? Does any one of you do that?
I do. I actually, it's ironic you ask about resumes. Today I was at Creighton University teaching resume and cover letters. And so I do help with that personal branding and teaching how do you show up, that they're both persuasive pieces. You want the cover letter to sound like you and you want the resume to look like you. And so I focus in on how do you make that really clear to that target audience. You don't want to write one cover letter and send it to 50 different companies. You want each one to be crafted specifically with that position and company in mind, and that your story of self, how you choose to show up, what is that advocacy statement? I do work with clients on that as far as what are those 6 to 8 words. You know, I protect audiences from boring speeches. That's my tagline for myself, or my advocacy speech. My husband, he's a farmer. He says it all depends on the soil. He really cares about soil health. So I do work with those kinds of message making and appreciate, the right words to be that authentic self, to show up as that authentic speaker.
And would you also know if I was to send you if my girlfriend is going to contact you and let's say send a resume, would you be able? That's slightly different. Would you be able to sift through that and see how that works? Because it's a little bit more technical. She's more in a corporate leadership position, or is it more, Amber, geared towards you? Would you know?
It's so funny because I'm like sitting here.
I think
I'm
they're
like,
slightly different.
We could do another workshop on like goal setting and like communicate, like making sure that there's a match between the kind of goals that you're creating for yourself and then how you're communicating yourself and how you're showing up in order to achieve those goals. Like that would be kind of fun. So, I mean, if it's more a technical review of their experience or their resume for my content, I mean, I also have a lot of recruiters that I work with. But it sounds like Tina, it's so, anything in the world. I mean, I do have a background in communication. I do teach communication, but anything in the world of communication, I'm really gonna like lean over to my friend Tina here, because this is really her wheelhouse, and she's just, such an expert at it. So, but you know what you mean. If there's anything I can ever do.
Perfect. Great. Okay, so I have resources. It's a network of conversation. I want to help my girlfriend as well. Some of it is more technical, but a lot of our conversations are more, okay, there is a gap of what you think you could do and what really your resume or CV or anything else conveys. I know who she is, Amber. She's a powerhouse, but she's been selling herself short and not getting what she wants. So I definitely see Tina's skills being able to convey the story of who she is, right?
Absolutely. Well, we are going to wrap this up because I want to be cognizant of people's time. Thank you so much. Do you mind if I take a quick picture? I know that we are short some of our participants, just to say, hey, we had this cool conversation. Is everybody okay with that? Are you ready? 1, 2, 3. All right. Thank you so much. And this will be posted on tinabakehouse.com, as well as I will send this over to Amber.
Thank you so much.